have Gerard Fabiano on Temur Delver playing against Jeff Folinus, who is on Miracles. Both players are 9-1, so let's go ahead and get things started off here. Jeff's going to start off. He's going to go to 19, sacrificing his Scalding Tarn for a basic island and cast Ponder. Let's see what he decides to do with those cards.
And we've seen the Miracles deck get played so many times this tournament, but for those of you who are unfamiliar, it is going to be the classic aggro versus control deck. Gerard's deck is the aggro deck, Jeff is playing the control deck, and we're going to see things play out in a pretty normal fashion where Gerard's trying to commit threats to the board, Jeff is going to be trying to answer them, and eventually, once he's exhausted Gerard of resources, find a way to win the game with either Entreat the Angels, maybe Monastery Mentor, and then also Jace the Mind Sculptor is another option for Jeff to win.
All right, well, Jeff is going to leave those 3 cards on top from his Ponder. Gerard is going to fall to 19 on his first turn, sacrifice Polluted Delta to go get a copy of Tropical Island. Let's see if we have a Delver of Secrets here.
So one other thing that's a little interesting about this is most Temur Delver decks do not have True Name Nemesis, and it is a very good threat. That said, it does get swept away by Terminus, and Jeff does have access to a Council's Judgment, which we've seen a lot of the Miracles decks not have access to. So while I think Gerard got a lot of percentage points in other matchups for his specific card choices, I think this is a matchup where the True Name and the Grim Lavamancer will be a little weaker than a Nimble Mongoose. But we'll have to see how things play out.
All right, well, Jeff is not going to interact with that Delver of Secrets. He's just going to fall to 18, sacrificing his Flooded Strand. Going to get a basic Plains, cast a Divining Top, and cast another Ponder. He will leave those 3 cards on top, draw a card, pass the turn back to Gerard. Gerard's Delver is going to decline the flip. We'll go to combat and attack for 1 with the Delver of Secrets, drop Jeff down to 17, play Tarmogoyf and pass. It looks like that's going to be a 2-3 Tarmogoyf. One thing that's interesting is we've seen now, basically every time Miracles has been on camera, all of their opponents have just had a bunch of Wastelands that have done nothing.
Yeah, I remember the early versions of Miracles. I used to enjoy playing a lot more when I could stifle and wasteland them more, but over time these Miracles decks have just found room for more and more basics and just made their mana base a lot more difficult to disrupt.
All right, well, Jeff is going to play a Volcanic Island and cast a Counterbalance. Gerard's going to fall to 18 and use a Force of Will. I'm not able to see what card he pitched for it, but he is going to attempt to stop the Counterbalance. Jeff is going to Force of Will back, pitching a Force of Will and falling down to 16. And that Counterbalance will resolve. Delver of Secrets is going to flip, revealing a Ponder, though. And that Tarmogoyf is going to grow to a 3-4.
Would have been really nice to have that Counterbalance hit the graveyard. It's such a great Magic card against the Temur Delver deck because it is almost all 1-mana spells. And if it went to the graveyard, it would also mean that the Tarmogoyf would be a little bit bigger. So Gerard not being able to counter that is a pretty big loss, and this could be a disaster for Gerard. We'll see how much damage these 2 creatures can push.
Well, they're going to crash in and drop Jeff down to 10. Wasteland is going to take care of the Volcanic Island, and Gerard's just going to pass the turn back. Jeff is going to look at the top 3 cards. At this point, he's just trying to find a Terminus.
Yeah, Gerard kind of needs to win with these 2 threats. It may be difficult for him to get another one to land on the board. That said, one nice thing about True Name Nemesis is it is a 3-drop, and generally speaking, these Temur Delver decks do not have any 3-drops in their main deck. So it is unlikely that Jeff just randomly has a 3-drop floating on the top of his library. So if Gerard does draw a True Name Nemesis, post-Terminus, that may be a good way for him to rebuild an offensive.
All right, well, Jeff is going to go ahead and shuffle with this Ponder.
Jeff does need to find something soon. Gerard has him on a 2-turn clock, so
We'll
that
draw
said,
a card off of the Ponder.
this Sensei's Divining Top is going to give him a lot of extra looks, especially if he can complement it with more fetch lands.
He'll play a Tundra and pass the turn back to Gerard. Gerard's just going to draw for his turn and attack. Jeff is going to cast a Brainstorm.
And Gerard has got to be real happy that it wasn't just a Terminus there.
Yeah. Jeff will put 2 cards back.
And if Jeff has a Source of Plowshares, I like plowing the Delver because he has a Monastery Mentor in, I believe he still has a Monastery Mentor in hand or close to the top of his library. And if he can just make some tokens, they can potentially chump block the Tarmogoyf, but the flying on Delver is a little harder to deal with.
Yep, so Jeff is going to plow the Delver. Gerard will go up to 21. Jeff's going to take 3 points of damage and fall down to 7. Just going to pass the turn back. In Gerard's upkeep, we're going to get a Snapcaster Mage.
And doing this during the upkeep is a great play on Jeff's part. If he did it during his turn, Gerard had his Tropical Island that he hadn't used and had that mana available. By waiting until Gerard's upkeep, now if Gerard wants to commit mana to dealing with the Snapcaster Mage somehow, he's not going to have it for the rest of his turn.
All right, well, the Swords to Plowshares is going to resolve on the Tarmogoyf. Gerard's going to go up to 24 and pass the turn back. Still not able to find another land.
And these Temur Delver decks, they are so land light. They're essentially 14 lands plus 4 wastelands to make 18. And it is not uncommon at all to see this deck operate on just 1 or 2 lands, quite effectively even. In this particular case, though, I think the main problem here is just that Jeff has counterbalance.
And so Jeff is going to draw with his top in his upkeep. Draw the top for the turn. He's going to play a Monastery Mentor with 1 mana available. Gerard's going to Brainstorm in response to the Mentor, triggering Counterbalance, revealing a land on top of Jeff's deck. And now Jeff's going to be able to replay his top, trigger the Monastery Mentor, and get a Monk.
And Gerard had great timing with that Brainstorm. He had waited and waited and waited for that Sensei's Divining Top to be in a different zone so that he could resolve the Brainstorm without the top countering it.
Gerard is going to finally find a land. He's going to cash it in for a Volcanic Island, fall to 21. Let's see what he can do now with 2 mana. He knows his spell is going to resolve here because there's a land on top of Jeff's deck.
Yep.
Jeff is hellbent, but he is going to be generating many monks every turn with that Sensei's Divining Top and the Monastery Mentor.
Yeah, if Gerard has a 2 mana spell, he knows it's going to resolve. But if he tries to cast a 1 mana spell, Jeff can, in response, just tap the top to draw a card and put the top on top of his library.
All right, Lightning Bolt here. Now, if Gerard has a Stifle, he can stifle the counter. He should be able to stifle the Counterbalance trigger.
Yeah, or the card draw off the top.
Yeah. Right, so it looks like we're going to stifle. All right,
so Crisis averted in terms of that Monastery Mentor getting out of control, but Gerard still is going to have an uphill climb fighting through that counterbalance. And Jeff does have a bit of a clock on him. This Monastery Mentor token does have prowess, and with the casting of that Sensei's Divining Top, it is a 2/2, and those 2 creatures can crash in for 4 damage.
Yeah, so he's going to come in for 4. It's going to drop Gerard down to 17. And now Gerard has some mana to work with. Ooh, there's a Forked Bolt. That could be nice if he can get it to resolve.
Yeah, he's going to have to find some way to make it so that the Sensei's Divining Top gets... well, one classic trick is to cast something... Well, because Forked Bolt is a sorcery, it's actually just going to be really hard. If
Forked just going to need another Stifle.
Yeah, if Forked Bolt was an instant, it would be a little easier to try to get it to resolve, but... the fact that it's sorcery complicates things quite a bit.
All right, well, Jeff's just going to take his turn, crash in for 3 with the Snapcaster Mage and the Jacob Wilson Monk token. He's going to use his top post-combat, pass the turn back to Gerard. Gerard's going to draw a Daze for the turn. It's like he does have a couple of True Name Nemesis in his hand, but does not have the mana to play them yet.
Yeah, and that's one of the tricky things about playing True Name Nemesis in the Temur Delver deck. It is kind of like a high-risk, high-reward situation because it is such a powerful card, so hard for people to interact with, but the 3 mana is a real cost. That said, it is also a blue card to pitch a Force of Will, which is a nice advantage over Nimble Mongoose.
Gerard is going to cast a Ponder. Jeff will reveal a Swords to Plowshares on top of his deck, which will counter it. Rearrange the top 3 on Gerard's end step. Draw for his turn, crash in for 3 yet again with Snapcaster Mage and a Monk token. Pass the turn back.
And if Jeff wanted to use burn a little bit of extra mana, he could push a little bit more or an extra damage each turn by putting his top on top of his library and then recasting it. But that does leave a little bit of room for things to go wrong, because Gerard may be able to find a window to resolve a spell when Jeff doesn't want that to happen.
Gerard's going to try and get a Tarmogoyf on to the battlefield. Jeff does counter it with a Snapcaster Mage on top of his deck with that counterbalance. Gerard does finally find a 3rd land and can land a copy of True Name Nemesis.
And this has to be a little bit of a surprise to Jeff. This is not something that he had accounted for. His Swords to Plowshares can't target it. He doesn't have that many 3 mana spells in his deck, and it's very unlikely that he was planning for this, and if he had seen one, would have kept it floating on top of his library. So the fact also that he just cracked his fetch land to go down to 6 is pretty relevant too. This True Name Nemesis can potentially race the board that Jeff has.
Yeah, so Jeff is going to use his Flooded Strand, fall down to 6. Going to look at his top 3 yet again, still with that counterbalance trigger on the stack, trying to find the last copy of Monastery Mentor or Vendilion Click to counter that True Name Nemesis.
Yeah, he could also find a Terminus, which would be one way to deal with it.
Looks like he found a copy of the card Counterspell that he's going to draw with his Divining Top.
Counterspell is a sweet card.
And that is going to stop the True Name.
So that was a pretty close call. Gerard might have been able to steal this game with that True Name Nemesis, but after spinning his top a bunch of times and cracking a fetch land, Jeff was just barely able to find an answer for it.
They always do.
It does seem that way.
It's a miracle.
It's always a miracle.
All right. Gerard's going to fall down to 4. Counterbalance.
Wow, and another counterspell.
Yeah, we're going to have another counterspell.
So that is likely game with even just with the Divining Top on top of the library.
All right, so
Jeff would have been able to threaten lethal, but it looks like Gerard is able to counter that counterspell.
Gerard is going to fall to 3 to resolve that Force of Will. Jeff has a copy of Top to replay. There's 1 Prowess trigger. Looks like there's just a bunch of lands on top of his deck. Now, Gerard can't really attack here, though.
Yeah, this is a little bit of a standoff, which certainly favors Jeff more than it does Gerard. So again, I've kept comparing True Name Nemesis to Nimble Mongoose. Nimble Mongoose probably would have been all right in this game, but it is nice that the True Name Nemesis can't be blocked. If Gerard had a Nimble Mongoose instead, Jeff could potentially run a double block or block with a Monastery Mentor token and then get enough Prowess triggers so to just straight up beat it in combat. So this True Name Nemesis is giving Gerard a chance to win a game that he normally wouldn't be able to do.
All right, so we've got a Forked Bolt targeting the Snapcaster Mage and the Monk token. Jeff is going to tap his top in response. Gerard's going to Brainstorm in response to the top.
And this is a classic play pattern that you'll see people take against Counterbalance. They'll cast 1 spell as essentially a sacrifice to the Counterbalance top, and then with the top draw trigger on the stack, they'll try to cast an instant speed spell in response in hopes that it will resolve.
All right, Gerard's going to put 2 cards back. Top will resolve. Counterbalance will counter the Forked Bolt by revealing Sensei's Divining Top. And Gerard will pass the turn. Gerard's going to Wasteland in Jeff's upkeep. Jeff has a Scalding Tarn. Going to replay the top. Look at the top 3.
And Gerard's probably hoping that Jeff just cracks 3 fetch lands. I think that's probably Gerard's most likely path to victory.
Gerard will just take his turn. If he can get a Tarmogoyf or something like that to stick, then he might be able to crash in with his true name.
Yeah, what's nice about getting a blocker onto the board is that Jeff's likely way to remove it would be a Swords to Plowshares, which would put Gerard ahead in the race.
All right, so here we have a Jace the Mind Sculptor. Gerard's going to hard cast a Daze. Jeff will play it. And now Gerard is going to
Is that another Daze?
Cast a Daze. That's the new Eternal Masters.
That's
Daze
cool.
art.
So now Jeff has to decide if he wants to crack his fetch land. I have to imagine that this Jace is quite valuable, but it's a little scary to leave himself tapped out.
Well, he hasn't played a land yet this turn, and he does get to brainstorm with his Jace if he wants to.
If he doesn't find a land, though, he could be dead to double Lightning Bolt from Gerard, or Forked Bolt Lightning Bolt.
Maybe we'll see a Jace +2 on Gerard.
Got to use the right color dice. It's very important.
We need to know its loyalty counters,
Yep.
man.
Run a tight ship here on Star City Games.
Going to get a Brainstorm.
If Gerard does try to race, Jeff could use that Swords to Plowshares defensively to gain some life.
Oh, you know what? He did play a land for the turn. He played the
fetch land?
The fetch land, yeah. Because Gerard had Wastelanded him. So shields are down. Kind of, sort of. Jeff does not have any mana available. But Gerard doesn't have a lot of mana to work with.
Yeah, this is as far down as the shields get.
And now a Tarmogoyf isn't even safe because he could just bounce it with the Jace. So we've got a Grim Lavamancer. Will be countered by a counterbalance, revealing another copy of Divining Top.
And with 2 Divining Tops, Jeff can make that Monastery Mentor token huge. He can essentially spend all of his mana to pump it up by continually making the 2 tops draw and cast.
Yep. And Jace is going to Brainstorm. So we're going to get a top that will pump the Monk.
And Gerard's probably looking at that fetch land saying, I just need 1 more of those.
All right, Jeff's going to look at the top 3.
It's pretty amazing how, when you look at this board state, it is so lopsided, and somehow this True Name Nemesis is kind of keeping Gerard in the game.
Yeah.
You know, he's probably going to lose, but you know he has a plan, and there's a chance.
And Jeff is just not going for it. He could just be bouncing those tops. He has to cast 3 spells to make it so the Monk doesn't die to the True Name.
Right.
Then he can attack with both of his creatures and knock Gerard to 1.
Oh, there we go.
Well, here's the Vending Click.
This is great too because it lets Jeff see Gerard's hand, and he can figure out what he needs to worry about. And I would expect this to be the play that allows Jeff to close this game out in the next 1 or 2 turns.
Well, Gerard's going to float a mana and play a Daze.
And Daze is a great card, but it's not as great in this game state.
Well, Gerard is going to concede in the wake of having to reveal his hand to Jeff. And Jeff Folinus is going to take game 1 here against Gerard Fabiano. Miracles over Teamer Delver. Let's go ahead and take a look at the player sideboard so we can see how we think they're going to change their deck up. Jeff has 2 Pyroblast, 1 Red Elemental Blast, 2 copies of Flusterstorm, 2 copies of Wear and Tear, 1 Surgical Extraction, 1 Rest in Peace, 2 Stoneforge Mystic, 1 Batterskull, 1 Moat, 1 Supreme Verdict, and 1 copy of Blood Moon. How do we think Jeff is going to sideboard?
So I think Jeff has a lot of good options here. I think the Pyroblasts and Red Elemental Blasts are going to come in. They hit Delvers, they hit Trinity Nemesis. The Teamer Delver deck is almost all blue. Rest in Peace can be a great way to fight against Tarmogoyf and Nimble Mongoose. Jeff may assume that there's Nimble Mongoose in the deck and bring Rest in Peace in for that reason. I also think the Stoneforge Mystic Batterskull package would probably be nice in this matchup. I don't think Moat will come in, although can certainly be considered. It's a little expensive, a little slow. It does line up against Trinity Nemesis quite well, but it doesn't line up well against Delver. And then Supreme Verdict, being a card that can just be uncounterable, sweep the board, is something that is along the lines of what Jeff would want. I think Blood Moon is also a very good card. I could see a situation, though, where Jeff only brings in Blood Moon when he's on the play, doesn't bring it in when he's on the draw. It is kind of a knockout punch against the Teamer Delver deck, but because they typically get ahead on the board, sometimes if Jeff takes a whole turn off to cast Blood Moon without impacting the board, he may lose to what's already there.
I can see that for sure. Now on Gerard's side, we have 2 copies of Pyroblast, 1 Ratchet Bomb, 1 Croson Grip, 1 Sylvan Library, 1 Pithy Needle, 1 Submerge, 1 Jace the Mind Sculptor, 1 Life from the Loam, 1 Mundane Click, 1 Umezawa's Jite, 2 copies of Ensnaring Bridge, 1 Ancient Grudge, and 1 Spell Pierce. What do we think Gerard's going to bring in?
So we've got a lot of 1-ofs. I think he's going to bring in the Pyroblast, deals with Jace, Counterbalance, Ratchet Bomb, also deals with both of them. Croson Grip, perfect for dealing with Counterbalance. Sylvan Library, great card for grinding your opponent out. Pithing Needle, can tag Jace, can tag Sensi's Divining Top. Jace the Mind Sculptor might also be something that Gerard looks to in this matchup, as well as Vendilion Click. I don't think he'll bring in Ancient Grudge because it's so hard to tag a Sensi's Divining Top with it. I would be a little surprised if he does that, but if he really thinks he can catch his opponent with it, he might.
I agree with all that. Do you think Spell Pierce might be worth something Gerard brings in when he's on the play or the draw?
Since he's seen the Monastery Mentors, and the games typically drag on for so long, I personally don't like Spell Pierce a whole lot in the matchup. When they're going to Miracle Terminus or something like that, it's not particularly great. He already has a lot of counter magic, and he already has a lot of stuff to bring in, so I don't think that he's going to bring that in from the sideboard. He may not take the one out of his main deck, but I don't think he actually has room for more of that effect.
Another interesting sideboard contention here is that since Gerard saw Monastery Mentor, and in general you have to expect these decks to have Monastery Mentor, how many Lightning Bolts do you end up keeping in? Do you have to keep all 4?
Yeah, well, that is pretty tricky. And that's one of the reasons why I value a card like Daze more than Spell Pierce, is because you don't really want to get caught in a situation where you have the wrong interactive spell for the wrong situation. I like keeping some number of Lightning Bolts. I think in the past when I played this matchup and my opponents had Monastery Mentor, I've had somewhere between 1 and 3 Lightning Bolts. Sometimes I say I'm just going to lose to it or just try to run it over, and if the game drags on really long, I'm probably just going to lose anyway. So you can run into problems when you're trying to interact a lot with an interactive deck, but you don't have as much card advantage. Because if you're both trading resources, but your opponent has 3 Jace the Mind Sculptors in their deck and you only have 1, you may have the right answer for the right situation, but just run out of gas and your opponent doesn't because they've built their deck for that long game. So I think it's the sort of thing where he may risk it and be a little shy on answers to Monastery Mentor in the form of Lightning Bolt, but I think it's probably just a risk he's going to take.
Well, that is pretty in-depth for a simple one small situation, which is what sideboarding and Magic is about. And if you want to get better at sideboarding, the number one thing you can do is practice, 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 and try different things. And one of the ways you can do that is by playing more tournaments like SCG Game Night. So for those of you who are interested in playing a bunch more Magic, getting some sweet prizes and swag like we see here, the Snipcaster Mage tokens and pins. Go to StarCityGames.com/game night. You can talk to your local game store and let them know, hey, I want this sweet stuff and I want to play more Magic. Get a hold of Star City Games and get signed up for it. So every week in July you can get Snipcaster Mages, but we also have something pretty cool planned for August where you can get Young Burrowmancer. And then we also have another one coming up in September where you can get Bone Chewer Giant.
Very, very cool.
So for those of you who are wanting to get some sweet swag, awesome pins, tokens, and just play more Magic, StarCityGames.com game night is perfect for you. It is a fun and friendly event. Go to StarCityGames.com/game night. Let your local game store know you want some so they can go ahead and get that scheduled for you there around your hometown.
And I feel like a lot of viewers don't realize that their local store is the best training grounds.
Oh, yeah.
I know for me, my local store, Toy Wiz, that is where me, Reed Duke, Kevin Jones, the last Grand Prix winner, a really young kid playing green-white tokens, we all got our start at Toy Wiz. That was our local store. That's where we went and battled. And, having these local events like game night are really where you train and level up. I feel like stores should have like leaderboards for the people who have worked hard here and how many top 8s they have now to really, show off their resume. Because I think a lot of local stores actually have, like if you look at that sort of stuff as a resume, I think a lot of local stores have a much more impressive resume than a lot of people realize.
Also, now when you go out to these local game stores to play in game night, in between rounds, you can get outside and catch the Pokemon.
Yeah, that's traveling around has become a lot more valuable.
Get some fresh air and a Nidorino.
Yep.
And for those of you who are gracefully here watching us on Twitch, you also can sign up and subscribe so that you can chat in our chat, and you guys get to decide the quarterfinals. So you can join the feature match area here on SCG Live via twitch.tv/SCG Live. Get the exclusive subscribers-only chat. Again, you decide the quarterfinals. You get some custom emoticons and a badge next to your name. I do need to start a campaign to try and get a CVM and Andy Boswell emoticons on there, since we already have Cedric and Patrick. But again, it's twitch.tv/SCG Live.
And we really are just puppets on strings for your viewing entertainment. You even get to pick the quarterfinals. Who knows what you'll be able to pick in the future.
So it looks like we've got a couple mulligans here. Jeff has kept his 6. Gerard, however, is going to 5, and that's really not where you want to be. Game 2, down a game against Miracles.
Yeah, you really, I mean, it's never good to mulligan. That said, the Temur Delver deck, it can get a very aggressive start. It can operate on very few resources. Gerard is on the play. So we could see a situation where Gerard just goes turn 1 Delver, turn 2 Tarmogoyf, similar to how he did in the previous game, and run away with the game very, very quickly without even having to interact that much. But unfortunately, he doesn't have the 1-drop here, so hopefully he's got some sort of pressure coming up soon, because time is not on his side.
Well, Gerard is going to keep his 5. He's going to lead off with a Scalding Tarn and a pass. Jeff is going to play an Island and Ponder, but he doesn't like what he sees, so he's going to shuffle those cards up and get a fresh look at a brand new card.
One of the great parts about this Temur Delver deck is that it can operate on so few resources. That said, it usually needs all the resources it can get its hands on, but a mulligan with this deck when you're on the play isn't as bad as it is with some other decks.
Gerard is going to play a Flooded Strand for his turn, fall to 19, sacrificing his Scalding Tarn, getting a copy of Volcanic Island. And here we have a Pithy Needle. Dimes to dollars is going to be naming Sensei's Divining Top.
Yeah, and this is a great card to have. It is so good at neutralizing Sensei's Divining Top. And this is a card that can be worth multiple cards. I mean, you may be able to look at this as essentially a 2-for-1 if Jeff ends up drawing 2 Sensei's Divining Top that he can't brainstorm away.
All right, so it looks like Gerard is going to name Divining Top with his Pithy Needle. Jeff is going to sacrifice his Scalding Tarn on Gerard's upkeep, wanting to deny Gerard access to some mana if he happens to have a Stifle to counter the activation. He does not. Gerard is just going to play a Misty Rainforest for his turn, and I think he's just passing back to Jeff.
And even though the mana denial plan against Miracles isn't as great it is against a lot of other decks, Stifle has a lot of utility in dealing with the Miracle triggers of Entreat the Angels and Terminus.
All right, well, looks like Jeff did just pick up a copy of Sensei's Divining Top, but he does have a counterbalance that will resolve. Gerard is going to crack his fetch lands on Jeff's end step, getting a Tropical Island and another copy of Volcanic Island. Maybe we'll see something like Croson Grip here to take care of that counterbalance. There is the Croson Grip. Now it has split second, so Jeff is not able to respond, but triggered ability still happens. So he gets a shot at finding a 3 with his counterbalance. He misses as he has a Source of Plashers on top of his deck.
Wow, and this is exactly what Gerard needs. This is the recipe that you want against any deck: is some potent threats, some good pressure, and some sideboard cards to disrupt your opponent's game plan.
So Croson Grip will resolve, going to counter the counterbalance for Jeff. Gerard's going to untap and just slam a True Name Nemesis down. Much like the Pokemon we're chasing in Pokemon Go, he is going to choose you, Jeff Folinus, as the target for True Name Nemesis. And now he has protection from that player.
I think you might have a Pokemon Go problem.
I might. All right, Jeff is going to sacrifice his Scalding Tarn, fall down to 17. See if he gets another basic land here. He is going to get a mountain.
And honestly, I hadn't said it yet, but I was lamenting that Gerard didn't have pressure until turn 4. But this True Name Nemesis is probably the best piece of pressure that he could have access to.
Well, here's the Jace, and the last 2 cards in Gerard's hand
Wow.
after his mulligan to 5 is a Force of Will and another True Name Nemesis. He's going to counter that Jace the Mind Sculptor, falling down to 16, and he does appear to be in the driver's seat. If Jeff is not able to find a copy of Terminus here and the next handful of cards in his deck, we might have some trouble here. He is just going to sacrifice that fetch land right away, though, so this might just be a hard-cast Batterskull.
Yeah, Gerard is out of gas.
Well, there's the Stoneforge Mystic, so it's likely he brought it in.
And it looks like Jeff vocally said, "I'm casting Batterskull," and Gerard just shows him the days. So that is brutal. What a top deck from Gerard Fabiano and Jeff Folinus.
Wow. All right, so Jeff does have the Batterskull. Gerard drew days for this turn.
These guys are throwing haymakers at each other.
The attack for 3 is going to drop Jeff down to 10. Gerard's starting to speed up here now that he can taste the end of the game. He's going to play the fetch land instead of the Volcanic Island that he has.
And countering that Batterskull is a huge deal also because Jeff has 2 Stoneforge Mystics in his deck that are now going to have no targets to search for.
All right, Jeff's just going to play another fetch land and pass back. Gerard's going to attack for 3 and pass the turn.
And now Jeff has to worry about cracking that fetch land. The difference between 4 and 3 is an entire turn.
All
Could
right.
Gerard win this game despite his mulligan?
Jeff is down to 4. Gerard's going to attack him down to 1.
We could be going to a game 3.
Here's a Ponder. Jeff has to find something like Council's Judgment or Terminus and have it resolve this turn.
Yeah, he could also have Supreme Verdict.
This is
He could also have Moat.
This is showing just how anemic this Miracle set can become when it doesn't have access to Divining Top.
Yep.
When it's not playing with, +3 cards every single turn on the top of their deck. All right, here's a Brainstorm.
So here's a Brainstorm. Brainstorms are not as good without fetch lands to go with them, and Jeff Folinus is at 1. And there's a Rest in Peace,
and
which
another
can be
Divining
good.
Top. All right, well, he can put those 2 tops back on top.
He can't shuffle them away, though. At least not yet.
All right, well, Jeff is just going to scoop his cards up, and Gerard is going to take game 2 on the back of a mulligan to 5. Very timely Croson Grip on the counterbalance, an early Pithing Needle to shut down the Divining Tops that Jeff picked up, and then he's just going to ride the back of that True Name Nemesis for a bunch of turns until the game is over.
And Gerard really only cast 4 spells that game. He cast the Pithing Needle, he cast the Croson Grip, he cast the True Name Nemesis, and then he cast the Force of Will that countered it.
I think the
there's
days
also
on
the days.
The days on the Batterskull is
Okay.
kind of the nail in the coffin. I'm not sure how Gerard was going to actually beat that Batterskull. Since he pitched the second True Name Nemesis to his Force of Will, but yeah, he really only cast just a handful of spells, and they were just in the perfect spot.
Yeah, they really were.
Now, do we think that either player is going to change up their sideboarding here? Is Jeff potentially going to bring in Blood Moon on the play?
I think that Jeff bringing Blood Moon on the play would be a good idea. I also think that Gerard may want to trim some of his dazes on the draw. Normally, I don't like to do that, but I know a lot of players do. And Gerard I think is one of those players.
Now, Jeff was able to see 2 copies of True Name that game, the one that was on the battlefield and one that got removed to Force of Will. Is it worth bringing in Moat?
I think I would probably bring in Moat. There's the Delver Secrets, but they're typically one of the easiest threats for you to deal with because not only do you have all the creature removal, but you have access to the Pyroblasts, and Jace bouncing them is a bit more effective than bouncing any other random creature. So I do like the Moat. Once it hits play, there's probably nothing that Gerard can do about it. He did see the one Croson script, but I don't think he's expecting Gerard to have a lot of Croson grips, and those Croson grips are already in such a small number are already going to be stretched very thin dealing with the counterbalances. So yeah, I do like Moat.
Well, that game 2 was pretty exciting.
Oh yeah.
Gerard mulliganed to 5, was able to cast the perfect spells at the perfect time. If you want to see more exciting matches, make sure you check out the Star City Games YouTube channel, where we have all of our Versus Series, Premium Archives, SCGWOR archives, where you can see fabulous, exciting matches like what is going on right now, unboxings, and much more. In fact, I even think I have a couple unboxings on that YouTube channel. So make sure you check that out, youtube.com/StarCityGames. It's completely free to subscribe via YouTube, and you even get notified when we post new videos. So.
And that's a great place to go if you want to figure out how different people sideboard in different matchups. You know, like sit down in front of a game with Joe Lissette with a notepad, and just every time you see a sideboard card in a matchup, just write it down and maybe try to get a feel for what cards you're not seeing that might have been sideboarded out. It's a great way to get better.
I have a feeling that's something that we're going to be doing as we're scouting the other teams when we're going to be playing in these opens. I mean, I need to know how Jim Davis sideboards. I need to know how Kevin Jones sideboards. I need to know how Joe Lissette sideboards.
Yep, it's a great way to know how to beat them.
All right, well, Jeff is going to be on the play for Game 3 here. He's going to start off with a Scalding Tarn, dropping down to 19, getting a basic island, and casting his Sensei's Divining Top. This could be a pivotal point in the game already. If Gerard doesn't have a Pithing Needle to interact with it, Jeff might be able to just start amassing so much advantage from the extra card looks at that Divining Top that Gerard might not be able to push through it.
Yeah, we've seen so many times this Miracles deck is just so good with Sensei's Divining Top, but without it, it is pretty clunky. It takes a long time for it to naturally draw what it needs, and a lot of the times it's just not as operable as it needs to be.
All right, well, Jeff is going to top in his upkeep. He's going to play Plains for the turn and pass back to Gerard. Gerard did not have a turn 1 play. Let's see if he has something on turn 2. Looks like we have a Ponder. Gerard has to decide if he wants to keep those cards or shuffle them away. He is going to keep them after rearranging the top 3. Looks like he's just going to pass the turn back to Jeff, who's going to top in Gerard's end step. There's a copy of Pyroblast, so it looks like he did bring in those red blasts.
Yeah, they're typically quite good in the matchup. They also go well if you are bringing in Moat, because once you get that in play, the only threat you really need to worry about is Delver.
Jeff is going to draw one of those blasts. He's going to play a Flooded Strand and pass the turn. It looked like there was also a counterbalance and an island in those top 3, so those are very good. I'd be surprised if we see Jeff use that fetch land anytime soon. George's just going to play a Wasteland and pass the turn back. He is lacking any white mana, or any red mana, sorry. Jeff is going to rearrange the top 3 on Gerard's end step. Both players are playing exceptionally fast. You can tell that they're both very well versed in their respective decks.
And I think the reason that Jeff didn't try to resolve Counterbalance on the previous turn is because he wanted to wait until he could do it now with that Pyroblast backup. Not only can this potentially protect the Counterbalance, but it also can counter a True Name Nemesis should it appear.
Well, here we have a Spell Pierce from Gerard. So if Jeff wants to pay the 2 mana, he's going to have to shuffle away his Divining Top. He does not want to do that. Just going to pass the turn back to Gerard.
And that's a pretty big deal to see that Jeff probably values the top more than he does the counterbalance. I mean, you also have to factor in the fact that if he not only would he be shuffling away his top, but he would be tapping out. But it is pretty interesting what that reveals about what he values in the matchup.
Well, he is going to shuffle away that Divining Top, sacrificing his Flooded Strand, going to 18. Gerard is going to attempt to resolve a True Name Nemesis. Looks like Jeff's going to use that Pyroblast to counter it. Let's see if Gerard's going to use a Daze. Jeff will play it. Does Gerard have another Daze? He does. He has another Daze. You saw just how good that card was in Game 2. All you have to do is attack for 7 turns and your opponent's dead. Now we've only got 6 turns since he's at 18. Gerard will replay one of those tropical islands, and now he even gets he even gets extra value out of his mana this turn because of those Dazes.
Yep, didn't have a land drop. Yeah, and Jeff, I like his move of not paying for the Spell Pierce. I do think that the Sensitive Drawing Top is probably worth more than the Counterbalance, and tapping out was pretty risky, especially because he had that Pyroblast, but Gerard managed to get his True Name Nemesis to resolve, and now Jeff is in a tough spot. This is a difficult card to deal with.
All right, well, Jeff is just going to play a Flooded Strand for the turn and pass. Gerard will attack for 3, dropping Jeff down to 15.
Normally, if this was a Nimbo Mongoose, it would only be attacking for 1, and Gerard would have to be worried about, even if he gets his graveyard fully loaded, the threat of Rest in Peace. But this True Name Nemesis, it can't be blocked, and it's always going to attack for 3.
All right, Gerard will just play a Tropical Island and pass. Jeff is going to sacrifice his Flooded Strand, fall to 14. Clock is still the same. We need 5 more turns. We're going to get another Basic Plains. Another Flooded Strand going to fall to 13. I think we might see a Hardcast Terminus here. There's a Basic Island.
I almost feel like it may not be a bad idea for Jeff to wait until he has another land drop, just so that he could play around a potential Daze. I think that Gerard has used 2 of them, so maybe he's just saying the odds are that he doesn't have another Daze, but... And it looks like Gerard is just going to have to let this resolve, and the crisis has been averted for Jeff Folinus, and he's answered this True Name Nemesis.
The Terminus is going to resolve. Gerard will play a Vendilion Click on Jeff's end step. Will resolve and target Jeff. Jeff has, looks like Snapcaster Mage, Force of Will, and Swords to Plowshares. So those are all pretty good Magic cards.
Quite good. So correct me if I'm wrong, but can Vendilion Click interact favorably with Miracle Triggers?
Yes. So the player draws the card, reveals it for the Miracle Trigger.
And with the trigger on the stack, you can
Vendilion
Click,
on the stack,
take it out of their hand.
Click out of their hand.
Yeah, that could have been a good play that Gerard might have been able to opt for. Ooh, this is a great card also for the
Here's
matchup.
The Sylvan Library.
Sylvan Library is a powerhouse. And with Jeff Folinus not having put any pressure on Gerard's life total, this Sylvan Library is essentially an ancestral recall with upside.
Just a green Necropotent.
Yeah, it really is.
He really is just going to be able to cash in life and draw extra cards here. And he's going to need that soon to get an answer for this Batterskull.
Yeah.
It is very difficult to erase this card.
It's very difficult. What Gerard would like to find is a True Name Nemesis. That would be the best way to hold it at bay. He may be able to do some good work with a Tarmogoyf, but Tarmogoyf can get tagged by a card like Swords to Plowshares.
And he knows that Jeff has that Force of Will Snapcaster Mage in hand, so he's really looking for something like Krosan Grip here.
Krosan Grip would be a phenomenal answer to it.
Well,
there's also a chance.
Look at 3 cards.
There's also a chance that after seeing the Batterskull, Gerard has decided to bring in the 1 Ancient Grudge that he has on his sideboard. That's also something to consider.
True.
It's a little unlikely, but it's certainly possible.
Jeff is going to Swords to Plowshares, Gerard's Vendilion Click in his upkeep. But man, was that Batterskull a good card right off the top of his deck. Again, as long as you keep putting perfects in your deck, you'll draw them eventually.
Well, that's the thing about Legacy decks, is typically you only play really good cards. So
you're just like 16 to 22 land and a bunch of perfects.
Yeah, if you're playing a Legacy deck and you're drawing cards and saying to yourself, "Oh, this card doesn't do anything," you probably shouldn't be playing those cards.
Okay, so I think that we're asking about the timing here between the Swords to Plowshares and the Sylvan Library. Because the trigger is placed on the stack in the he's potentially, oh no, we're going to see a Brainstorm in the upkeep here with Sylvan Library. Uh-oh.
Nice.
So basically how this works is Gerard is going to have to distinguish the cards that he has drawn with the Brainstorm for the turn because they are eligible to go back with Sylvan Library. So he has to keep the cards completely separate.
And Gerard, knowing his stuff, is covering this with the judge.
Correct.
Before he goes through it, because
this is tricky and can be very bad.
Yeah.
So those cards are all in his hand, but he has to keep them separate so they are identifiable.
This has got to be the only situation where this comes up, I have to imagine.
Yeah.
What a bizarre... Magic is such an interesting game.
And it's a great thing that we have
Judges.
And Nicholas Saban in general is just a very, very good judge.
He's a really nice guy.
To handle it properly. So now those two cards off to the side have been drawn this turn with Brainstorm, so they are eligible to go back with Sylvan Library if he wants to.
And now he's looking at the top 3 with the Sylvan Library, and he's going to have the option to pay 4 life to draw more of them.
Yes, because the way Sylvan Library is worded, it only checks for cards that you've drawn this turn.
And Gerard's just saying, yeah, I'll pay a bunch of extra life to draw a bunch of extra cards.
Yeah.
That is always the right move.
So he's going to Flooded Strand on his turn. Oh, he has he brought in Vapor Snag.
Nice. Well, he didn't bring it in. He just had it in.
Oh, I guess
he's
keeps
got
it
one
in.
main deck.
So
yep.
Vapor Snag is going to take care of that germ. That's going to drop Jeff down to 9, which could end up being relevant. Divisible by 3 is important for this Temur Delver deck.
Yeah, I'm curious to see Gerard's whole plan here. One of the nice things about bouncing the token is while it doesn't deal with this Batter Skull in a hard sense, because Jeff can bounce it and replay it, but bouncing it and replaying it costs a lot of mana. And Gerard has a lot of options. He can counter on the way back down. He can stifle the germ token being created, and he can just cause Jeff to just spend a lot more mana than he wants to. It's pretty inefficient to do this, and with the life totals where they're at, and Gerard having this good threat on the board in the form of Tarmogoyf, this game is starting to become about tempo as it's coming to a close.
Jeff decided to not counter either of those spells with the Force of Will and Snapcaster Mage in his hand.
Yeah, and I think Gerard has a Force of Will in his hand too. So both of these players having access to counter spells are waiting for the perfect spot to pick a fight.
Well, he did get to draw a bunch of cards last turn, so...
Yeah.
Jeff is casting a Ponder, deciding what he wants to do with these cards on top of his deck. He has an answer for that Tarmogoyf with the Snapcaster and a Plow in his graveyard, but that Goyf is up to a 4/5 because we have an enchantment. Alright, Brainstorm will resolve for Jeff.
And if Gerard can Force of Will a Snapcaster Mage, that will put the Goyf up to a 5/6, meaning that it would be a 2-turn clock.
Jeff is just going to play a Counterbalance.
And there's a chance that Gerard may try to ignore this. If he's hoping that he can just Force of Will something important and then ride this Tarmogoyf to victory and win in the next 2 turns, Gerard may just decide that this is okay.
Gerard will let the Counterbalance... Oh, no, maybe. Yes, no, maybe so.
And it seems like Gerard has decided that this game is likely to go on for a while, and or that... so Gerard's actually countering... He's let the Counterbalance resolve.
Oh, no.
And he's trying to counter the Sensei's Divining Top.
He's countering the Divining Top and stifling the Counterbalance trigger because Jeff has a Force of Will on top of his deck. He just went to reveal it, and Gerard stopped him. So the Counterbalance...
And this
is going to put an artifact in the graveyard, which will grow the Goyf to a 5/6.
And now Gerard has a 2-turn clock and knows that Jeff only has a Force of Will on top. And Jeff doesn't have enough mana to bounce and replay the Batter Skull in time to chump block the Tarmogoyf. So this might have been a game-winning move from Gerard Fabiano.
All right, so Gerard's going to look at the top third. We'll draw 3 with the Sylvan Library. He can pay 4 life per card to keep the second and or third card.
Yep.
He's going to be able to attack Jeff down to 4. I think Jeff is probably going to use his fetch land to shuffle his deck, because if he can find a land, then he can bounce and replay that Batter Skull.
Yeah, he's going to have to bounce, replay it as a
chump blocker, gain 4 life.
Yeah. And a lot can go wrong with that. A Daze could break that up. Spell Pierce break it up. Spell Pierce could break it up. Or Stifle, I mean. Another Force of Will.
Gerard can even hardcast Force of Will at this point.
Yep.
Oh, Gerard has a Wasteland, so he can hit the Volcanic Island that Jeff has.
Oh,
and
man.
even if he goes that route,
Right.
he can negate him the mana.
So this is close. Jeff is going to have a flip, but he needs something really good here. Supreme Verdict would probably be his best draw.
Gerard's going to keep one extra card, fall down to 8. He's going to attack Jeff for 5. It's going to put him at 4. Pass the turn back. All right, Jeff's upkeep. He's going to sacrifice the Arid Mesa.
And he's going to have one draw. Ooh, does Gerard have a Stifle?
Gerard is going to Lightning Bolt Jeff in response, which will kill him.
Yep, because he's at 4.
Because he's at 4.
Wow, Gerard Fabiano, ladies and gentlemen, a new take on Teamer Delver. You know, we haven't seen him in a little while, but now he's back in action and he's playing quite well. He navigated that match perfectly. All of his sequencing, you know, figuring out when to stifle, what to stifle to get his spells to resolve, you know, stifling the counterbalance triggers. Also, I love that one spot too, where he allowed the counterbalance to resolve, knowing, okay, like this game's going to be over soon. The counterbalance itself doesn't do a whole lot. I can probably get away with letting that resolve. And then he countered the Sensei's Divining Top because that would give Jeff a lot more draws, a lot more looks, and that's what would really make the counterbalance powerful.